It's the Out the Box Rugby Podcast with André Pretorius and Wihan Velman, only on MEGAFOON Rugby.
This is part 2 of our 3-part series on the mechanics of the pro-form kicking method. Wihan van Riet from the Rocketfoot Academy and former Springbok flyhalf André Pretorius are interrogating the method, the blueprint that Wihan wrote about the pro-form kicking method. And before we get back to that, Wihan has invited you to submit videos of your kicking and of yours and your sons. And he's willing to take a look at your videos and start a discussion with you. His contact details are in the description down below. Either email him or WhatsApp him. And without any further ado, let's get back to André and Wihan.
The start, you're looking for a good setup approach, and then ultimately that body position that gives you that kick and the alignment and everything coming together. Take us through the setup of the pro-form kicking system.
Yeah, I think we also touched on it earlier. I mean, there are different ways to approach this, and again, it's also relative to the height of the ball and your tempo regulation. So those are things that we need to consider. But if I'm kicking the ball off the ground, I want to be 4 steps back as I start my approach. So I take 4 steps back from the ball and 2 nice and wide steps, 90 degrees, exactly 90 degrees. And this creates the relationship that I need between myself and the ball and the goalpost. And you know, that angle and that relationship is again, it's going to create that natural relationship where as I land on the plant foot and I swing forward at the ball, that rotation is going to happen and the ball is going to go in the direction that I want it to go. So that's the basic foundation of it. I know kickers like to take a few extra steps and maybe a step back and a step forward. To me, and you mentioned it earlier, like as a coach, you want to say, no, this is my way, you need to do it this way. It's not, everyone's a little bit different. So in rugby, you can afford that. So there's no rule that says you can't take those steps and whatever. You just have to understand the consequences that you are complicating you're complicating it unnecessarily. But if it makes you feel more comfortable, you can have more steps. If it comes down to it, we're looking for 2 very specific steps and then an action at the ball. So we're looking for that very controlled and precise jab step that sets the tone, tempo, and the direction of your approach. And then we're looking for that following step, that touch step, because it needs to be a touch or more like a vaulted step. We need to get off that foot quickly because we want to kick the ball as quickly as possible. And then we have the action at the ball. If we've run correctly with the right mechanics and we haven't lingered on that touch step and we did the jab step correctly, now we're entering the kick space or that moment in the correct body position, and we want to just get that foot to the ball as quickly as possible. If we've run on the correct lines with both feet, we haven't deviated from that center line. That deviation happens when you turn. You'll come off your lines, you'll turn, and you'll come off that center line. So there'll be that deviation. But if you haven't done that because you've kept the ball as the target, as this core principle or the sole objective, then you're now in the perfect space between, or perfect relationship between you and the ball to then just simply swing forward and be in this balanced body position, and then that results in that very efficient and effective follow through. So yeah, that's kind of like, I know I touched on sort of everything there real quick, but it is a cause and effect. Everything is a cause and effect relationship. One thing sets the gears in motion for the next thing to occur, and so on and so forth. So we have to understand that's what we're really doing, and that starts with setting yourself up correctly. If you feel more comfortable closer to the ball, that has consequences. If you want to be further away from the ball and use more steps, that's also got more consequences. The reason why the pro-form system works like this is because in the NFL or college football or whatever, this is the most amount of space that you can use up before you're taking too much time to kick the ball and you'll get blocked. So it's the most amount of momentum and power that you can generate in your approach before your kick gets blocked by a 9-foot lineman trying to stop you from winning the game at the last second.
Yeah, you're not going to get away that easy. You have touched on a lot, but there's so much I want to talk about. Yeah. So firstly, if you get to the back of a run-up and you've got your left foot in front, your right foot at the back, usually when you start your run-up, if you want to start with your left foot, your right foot would come up together with the left and you'd go with your left. Or you just start from that position. A lot of kickers do this to get into a nice rhythmic momentum run-up. But in your system, you're staggered at the back, left foot in front, and then you actually start with the left foot. And you call that the jab step. Just take us through that and why that is so important in the sequence.
Perfect. Let's remember the ultimate objectives that we talked about earlier. One was that the ball is the target, but the other one is just as important, if not more important, which is body position at impact. And so when we have that answer, like what is it that we want at the moment of impact in terms of body position, balance, weight, distribution, swing path, etc., etc. When we have that answer, we can then reverse engineer that and see what is the easiest way to get there with the least amount of variables. And that starts with this jab step. The left foot has to go forward away from your body, land on the ground, and then initiate what we would call a pull. It's more of a pull in the hamstring, because the entire secret to achieving this body position without having to manufacture it suddenly at the ball. Remember, we want to just end up in that body position. We don't want to change things as we get closer to the moment of contact. You just want to seamlessly end up in that position. That starts by setting the tone of this approach, because kicking is 99% just running mechanics. It's really much less about kicking the ball than anything else. And so when you do this jab step correctly, what you're doing is, if you're pulling and not pushing, if you're pushing off the back foot, all you're doing is you're just moving your body weight forward, like you would start a 100-meter race. At first half of the race, or first 30 or 40 meters of the race, you're forward with your body weight and you're generating speed and you're kind of running on your toes and your quads. Now, this is instinctively what you want to do when you're in a static position and you want to start moving and you want to generate some speed and momentum. But it takes away from the ability to accomplish this body position so seamlessly. Almost makes it impossible to. And also, it also has an effect on your hip position and that relationship between your kicking leg and the ball and so forth. But more so, we're looking at setting the tone so that we're running with the correct mechanics in the correct way, so that we just seamlessly end up in this body position. That starts with the jab step, and it starts with that foot going forward, grabbing the ground, and initiating a pull. So we're pulling ourselves forward. Mike always used to tell me, you got to be far away from the ball, but you got to get there by pulling. Like pulling. Every time a foot touches the ground, it's an opportunity for that foot to pull you forward. And I wake up in a cold sweat at night thinking about pulling myself in my approach. Am I doing it enough? Could I be doing it better? So yeah, it just keeps you nice and tall and vertical and balanced. And that is, again, when you're looking at a guy kicking the ball out of hand, that's the body position he's in. He's nice and tall and vertical. No one's in this position when they're kicking the ball out of hand. Everybody's in this nice and tall and vertical position. That's why it's easy to kick the ball 60 meters downfield, because you're open. You can let that energy flow and go. And so that it just comes down to understanding how to run, and that jab step sets the tone.
And again, understanding that pulling opens you up, where if you're pushing off the ground with the quads, as I read in your book, it's closing you up, it's closing you down, you're leaning forward, and you're not in that really big posture that you want to be. Now we get to the approach. And before we get there, the last part of the setup is the track creation. Why is it important to stay on your tracks and not to get, a lot of kickers get into this habit of walking and kind of walking on one line instead of staying on their tracks. Why is that so important, Wihan?
Yeah, you touched on it. We call that running on a tightrope. It's so important because, I mean, the more I say these things, the more it's going to be like, that's so logical. But it's because both your feet have different locations to go to. Your plant foot has to go here and your kicking foot has to go there. And so when you're running on this tightrope in the middle, you're making it harder for each foot to get to their respective locations. You're also changing the relationship between the kicking foot and the ball, and then what is possible in your swing. And you're changing the relationship between, you know, the plant foot and the plant foot location and what your body needs to do in order for it to get there. Now, we don't want any deviation from that center line. Like if you're in your start of your approach, you've got a center line that connects you to a position or a point next to the ball. that's sort of created by creating these tracks with your feet, almost like a train track. The plant foot is running towards where it's going to end up, and the kicking foot runs to the inside of the ball. And we'll discuss why that happens and why that's important. But now you're running on these two tracks, and if you can stay on your tracks, you stay on the center line. Your body stays centered, and it becomes an athletic feat to kick the ball if when you get closer to the ball, you have a deviation from the center line. Because effectively, the ball, you and the ball have a relationship, and the closer you're getting to it, the more important it is to keep that relationship the same. Because if you change that relationship at the last second, which most guys do because they turn, and then all of a sudden the ball is not where it was, it's now in another position relative to you. And so all we're doing with those tracks is we're just establishing a relationship that we have with the ball, and then just keeping that relationship between us and the ball exactly the same. So there's no deviation from that center line. The plant foot goes where it needs to go. The kicking foot needs to go goes where it needs to go. And it's just easier to consistently make the same contact with the ball. And that's the whole purpose of being a great American football kicker, is that you have this repeatable system where you kick the ball exactly, almost robotically, exactly the same way every single time. And we'll touch on a little bit more of the football stuff, I'm sure, as we go forward. But yeah, essentially it's consistency. That is one of the root causes of being a consistent kicker, is being consistent with where you're running, and if that relationship makes sense. We'll talk more about how that relationship makes sense and why we run where we run.
Without a doubt, I think the word consistency comes to mind, and the way you put that visual out there with the tracks, the ball staying in one place, you're the one moving. If you move offline, then that means the ball's moving offline, and that'll have an effect on the kick then. So you touched on it. There's three lines that you go into to get you into the optimal position for your plant foot, your kicking foot. What are those three lines, and why are they important?
Yeah, so like I said, when I was just explaining these track creations, you've got your plant foot line. That's where your plant foot is running, and then you've got your kicking foot line, which is where it's running, and then you've got what I would just refer to as the midline of your body. What I like to describe to kickers or guys that I'm coaching is like, if you would imagine that there are laser pointers fixed to, let's say, your left shoulder, your right shoulder, in the center of your body, and those laser pointers are pointed at those final locations. So left shoulder to the plant foot, middle of the body, the center line, and the right one, of course, past the inside of the ball on those tracks. As you're running, those lights, those lasers should never shine anywhere else. So they should always be shining down those lines. And that just keeps the ball in that relative position the whole time. And again, reduces cognitive load, because if you change that relationship, the ball is not where it was. It's now somewhere else. And now you've got to find it. And then it becomes way more of a cognitive and athletic feat to find the ball and kick it, then just keeping the ball in the same position, the same way you would have it in your hand. You have the ball, you know where it is, and you just put it where your foot is going to be. And that's essentially what we're doing. The ball is in this position. We're running and we're swinging at this location where the ball is going to be. No need to change that. And I think the thing that people need to click when they hear this, they're like, okay, but how do you get the ball to go to the target? It's based on the angle and the calibration that you've done beforehand, and that the fact that this natural rotation will occur. The same way, if you're a bowler, you're running down to bowl the ball. The reason why you have leverage to actually generate this the speed with your arm to bowl the ball is because you have a plant foot that lands on the ground and slows one half of your body down, creating the leverage to turn the other part of the body. It's the same concept. Same as a golf swing. When you're swinging a golf club, you don't think about turning. You shouldn't. The best golfers don't. They hit the ball, and then the turn happens naturally. It's the same concept. So yeah, those are the functions of those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit different for my golf. Normally, after the shot, I have to think about where I have to drop. So,
yeah, me too.
Before we get, it's a great game, but geez, it can be difficult at times. Vian, before we get to the tempo and the stride ratios, and I know you want to get to the stride ratios because that's what really tickled your fancy, if you want to call it that. we've got the lines going to the ball now. What about the horizontal lines, your shoulders and your hips? What do they do on the way to the ball? What's the optimal position for them?
Yeah, it's going to sound crazy, but nothing needs to change. Everything stays exactly the same way. Essentially, the position that you are when you start the approach is the exact same position that you want to be when you address the ball. That way that you're reducing all the variables. You're not turning, you're not doing anything. So what I like to think about and what I like to teach is you're governing the approach with balance, right? Well, to a degree, some of the approach is tempo and stuff like that, but you're governing where you're going with balance. If you're level, then you're going forward, right? Same way that if you were running, and another analogy that I use when I'm teaching boys, your brain wants you to do other things. It wants you to turn. It thinks the goalposts are to your left. They are, but we've discussed what implications that have. But you're running down this approach the same way that you would run a 100-meter race or a 40-yard dash. You're running straight. Now, this sounds crazy to somebody, like, how difficult is it to run straight? It's difficult because your brain thinks the target is there to your left, and now it wants you to do all these different things. But essentially, you're just running straight. So it's imperative to remain balanced, completely balanced. If you had 2 glasses of water on your shoulder, not possible, but just as an analogy, you should be able to run with both those waters or glasses of water remaining stable and not spilling any water anywhere. And that way you know that you're running straight. If you're here, you're running that way. If you're this way, you're also running that way. You're also changing the angle of your hips, and that has an effect on where your feet go, and then that eventually has an effect on where the ball is in relation to you. So yeah, it's actually very simple. Where you start, you're in a balanced body position, you're facing a certain direction, you commit to that line and you commit to that body position and that direction. And what's the point if you committed to that, if you just change that along the way? You don't need to. You just stay committed to that line and that body position, and you try to just take this whole body position and put it in the position at the ball and then kick it. And that's it. Simple as that.
You make it sound very simple, but I see so many kickers have a great starting point, and then on the way to the ball, because they change their line, they've got to start finding space with their hips, and then everything just tumbles down, and it has a big snowball effect. And that's why I really like the process that you're putting out there, and the simplicity. Well, it takes a lot of hard work to get there, but once you get there, I think it could be easier to be consistent with implementing it, because there's not a lot required in terms of change. You just need to get to the ball pretty much the way you started.
Which is the hardest part, because your instincts are wrong. That's what it comes down to, is that your instincts are wrong, and the way that you're processing to kick the ball is wrong. Doesn't mean it can't work. Doesn't mean that if you don't do it enough, you may be able to master all the cognitive load and variables in that particular method. We've seen it before countless times, but you're right. It's easier. It's a lot easier because you're doing far less. But not only is it easier, it's also more powerful. Your body's in a better position. Not just powerful, it's also more, for the lack of a better way, it's healthier for your joints and your lower back. Like, your body naturally wants to be in this position. It naturally flows this way. It wants to kick the ball like this. And for that reason, it's easier to replicate. There's no guesswork. There's no, in this kick, the ball's there, and in this kick, it's 2 degrees to the right. And, depending on how good you are at running straight, but for the most part, the ball's always in exactly the same position, and therefore you can always kick it the exact same way. And what's different is with this other paradigm of thinking about how to get the ball to go there, like you just mentioned, the guy starts in a good position, and then he just starts to change all of that. He just changes his relationship to the ball, making it effectively way more difficult to kick the ball. But it all comes down to the way they process the kick and what their instincts are telling them to do. And that is why it's more difficult to work with older kickers, because it's not as though this is a difficult thing to learn. It's a lot harder to unlearn the things that you've taught yourself. That's the difficult part. So the easier students to work with are the I've mentioned before, the young kids, because they're a clean slate. You can program all of these things into them quite easily. But an older guy, he will have to understand that there will be some sort of a sacrifice. But then it also comes down to person. Sometimes you just get crazy good athletes who can just take instruction and do it. I'm sure you know about this as a coach.
For sure. And again, I agree with you. I think you need to get to those young guys kicking at the moment who's implementing a lot more of your system than they think, and keep them on the track, so to speak, you know. Okay, so we're in the approach now, and you talk about time, tempo, and stride ratios. Now, the picture that I've got in my mind is what you've written in the book is, think of a shopping cart going down a hill, you know, not completely at that pace, probably at the end of the hill, but, you know, that image. Explain that to us and how that has an influence on the approach into the ball.
Yeah, again, another analogy I stole from my coach, Mike Hollis. Sorry, Mike, I'm just giving you some credit here, but he's the best at this. He's so good at these visuals and teaching. He's also just a guy with so much passion for this. But Mike would, oftentimes when I've run into a problem and I can't understand why I'm missing kicks, 90% of the time it had to do with my tempo and with the ratios of my strides. But those two things are really the same thing. The size of your strides is sort of superimposed of your tempo and vice versa. The two sort of create one another. Mike would also always use the analogy that when you have a shopping cart or a bicycle on top of a hill and you let it go, gravity is going to pull on this shopping cart and it's going to gradually increase in speed. So there's a progressive increase in your tempo and in your acceleration. And the whole idea and concept of this is that this is the kicker, don't mind the pun, but the most important part of this is the fact that you want to be at your fastest at and right after contact. You want to accelerate as you kick the ball. You still want to be accelerating. Guys that stagnate, and this is another thing that we kind of touched on earlier with an exaggerated backswing, they are sometimes at their slowest during the approach when they're actually kicking the ball. And it's because, back to what we're trying to do with Proform, we want to be accelerating as we're kicking the ball because that momentum allows a lot of the things to happen. Like it delays some of that rotation. It gets the swing path in the correct position. It allows your body position to be correct. You get off the plant foot faster, so you're not sort of stuck on that plant foot over rotating. So there's a lot of things that are hinged on body momentum that you have to have body momentum to make a lot of these things work. I know a lot of kicking coaches talk about momentum. I don't want to get into how I disagree with all of them, but we really need momentum to make this thing work. And so that's why it's important to understand that the approach is this gradual increase in speed, and that speed is at the apex right after you've kicked the ball. You're actually still accelerating into your follow through. And yeah, if you do it, and you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. Oh, okay, now it works. Now it makes sense.
That visual just gives a great. It really shows you what the approach should look like, and you know, all the great coaches, and obviously Mike is one of them, has the ability to just put things in perspective with one or two phrases. And sometimes it doesn't happen on the spot. You walk away and it goes, oh, that's what he meant. And this is what, and that's amazing that you get those coaches that can do that. So we got the tempo, and you say A plus B is C. What are we talking about?
Yeah, these again are just relationships, and it falls back to that idea that kicking is a cause and effect, a collection of causes and effects, and that every movement that you make has an effect on the next movement, and so on and so forth. So without accomplishing certain things at the start of the approach, you can't accomplish things at the end of the approach or at contact, and so on and so forth. So it's a system of relationships. And the way in which we program those relationships is by using this A plus B equals C formula. And it's just golden ratio relationships. I've touched in it on our previous podcast, and I've often said, like, I don't want to talk too much about the maths. It's not my strong point. But if you look at your own body, like you are a living, breathing representation of these golden ratio relationships. Your fingertips in comparison to the size of your hand, in comparison to your forearm, that's A plus B equals C, and so on and so forth. And to me, it's just like, if your body is that, like, wouldn't it make sense to program your kicking method to follow the same relationships? Your body wants to move that way. It understands it. It perfectly superimposes over one another. And so all that means is, like, and it's not just in the stride ratios, and you also find it in your tempo. Of course, you're moving from one step to another. So it's idealistic to say that your tempo should increase gradually, like a shopping cart going down a hill, because a shopping cart is not taking actual steps. It's just got wheels and it's just smoothly increasing. But that analogy was to just describe how smooth we want to be in the approach, but we still have steps. And so you are moving at, different speeds, so to speak. And those speeds are transitioning from one step to the other. So we want to apply that same A plus B equals C throughout your approach, whether it's your strides or your speed. So let's use the strides as an example. So the way that I figured this out, actually, I watched an episode of Ancient Aliens long ago, and these guys were talking about the pyramids and how they were built and so forth. And I realized that once they mentioned this A plus B equals C formula, that it's kind of part of life, and it's sort of embedded in biology and nature and so forth. I kind of looked at what we were doing, and I realized, without even programming it this way, that it was already present in the technique. It's not like I discovered this and then applied it to it. It was already there, the way in which Mike already taught it. So if you stand in your starting position with your feet staggered, there is a space between your feet at the start of the approach. Let's say from the toes of your left foot to the toes of your right foot. If you measure that space and you multiply it by the golden ratio, it gives you the ideal space that the next stride should move into, or sorry, the jab step should move into. So that space has now increased to that space. And you can literally just continue with that formula into the next and into the next and into the next. So in short, it is A plus B equals C, A plus B equals C, and then B plus C equals D, and D plus, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a way in which your strides and your speed progresses smoothly in the approach, so that you're not stepping too far or too shallow, and you're not too slow or too fast. It's a perfect relationship between the distance of the next stride and the previous stride. It's a perfectly balanced and proportionate way of approaching the ball.
That's great, Wihan, because I think I see so many kickers get stuck on that plant foot, and it kind of becomes like an anchor, and they don't know why they're kicking the ball low and left, because everything's going left from swinging around that plant foot. And what I like about this system is the fact that you're still speeding up once you get beyond the ball, which in turn promotes that getting off the plant foot, ensuring that release, that straight release on the ball. Now, I mean, I'm sure the viewers have seen your kicks and have listened to the gunshots fired when you hit the ball. So I'm sure they want to get into the actual kick. You've got a great saying, say, plant where you run and run where you plant. Is that also to do with just getting off that foot in terms of not getting stuck and ensuring that you're speeding up?
Yeah, I think the plant where you run where you plant is just, again, a reference to that. We don't want any deviation and we want to stay balanced. If I touch on getting off the plant foot and why a lot of kickers get stuck on that plant foot, it's this other paradigm of thinking. It's big backswing. A lot of coaches refer to it as a power step, so they're driving themselves into the kick. It's a lunge from that previous step. They have like 2 or 3 small steps and then a big leap into the plant foot. Again, just not proportionate, not balanced. And that's why these ratios work so well. So now they're in the plant foot, they're heavy on the plant foot, the body position is collapsing, and they only really have the leg to kick the ball with. And instead of changing that, they just adapt and kind of learn how to get the ball to go where they want it to go eventually. But for us, one of the reasons why we get off the plant foot so quickly with the Proform method is because, and this is going to sound kind of ironic, but it's because your weight is back. When your weight is back on the plant foot, it allows you to skip through because your leg swing, it's got a clear path, and it allows that leg swing to accelerate. So in addition to the ratios and relationships between your strides and this gradual increase in speed, you're also landing in this body position where your weight distribution is back, and it opens up this, it brings your hips forward, it limits the backswing, and that kicking foot gets to the ball quickly. So you don't have to be in this position for very long. And so you're kicking the ball very quickly and you're out of that position. And that is essentially the reason why you're in and out. You're into contact and you're through, and you kind of follow the path of the ball as a result. So it's the combination of all those things. Again, cause and effect, right? Cause and effect relationships. It all starts with that first centimeter that you move. And then it builds up upon one another. And then if the system comes together and all these interconnected parts work together, you have what happens here at the ball. On the plant foot, kick the ball quickly, perfect body position, forward swing, accelerate into contact, and boom. The ball's gone and you are through contact efficiently and aesthetically.
Yeah, and I mean, we're not going to go into it, but before we started recording, I asked you a question saying you're kicking into a big headwind. Your system kind of promotes being up and back, leaning back so that you stay nice and strong. And I asked you if it's possible to change the ball flight if you needed to, and you said yes. Just briefly touch on that. I think that's probably a subject for another recording, but just briefly touch on that and the consequences and how you can actually do that. Because I think sometimes when you look at new systems, a lot of players, coaches will rather look at reasons why it won't work. And, you know, I want to debunk some of those, even in this conversation, that, you know, you can't kick like that into a headwind. Yes, you can. How?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it comes down to understanding the blueprint. And we did touch on this earlier, so I'm just going to repeat what we talked about earlier. Once you have the blueprint, you understand the consequences in the system. So, for instance, if you wanted to keep the ball lower and you wanted your body slightly more over the ball, you understand what the consequences of that is, because you learn that a backward body position with your weight back and you being balanced and in a straight line, the purpose of that is to allow the kicking leg to swing forward, but it also allows the kicking leg to swing forward because it delays the rotation. So if I'm going to have my weight slightly more forward, it's going to cause that rotation to happen slightly earlier. And now I can again find the answers. What is the consequences of that? Well, if I'm running on my Proform lines where I would be comfortable and accurate if I'm in a balanced body position with my weight back, if I'm turning earlier, it's going to flare my kicking foot out of that line because my hips are turning before I'm getting to the ball. And therefore, I can then address that consequence by running slightly further inside of the ball on different lines, so to accommodate that turn in the hips. So it just comes down to understanding the system. If you understand the system, you can make changes to it because you understand how it works and you understand the consequences of certain things, and you can program it like that. And we touched on having sort of this idea of maybe having 2 or 3 different ways of kicking the ball to address something like a headwind. You know, okay, there's a headwind, I'm going to be slightly more forward. The consequence of that is I'm going to turn a little bit faster. The consequences of that is I can't run as tight to the ball. I need to be slightly further inside of the ball. And the same thing would be with, you know, perhaps maybe kicking longer distance goal kicks, like 65-meter goal kicks, right? We can do that because we are, with regards to football, we're kicking off, right? And with your kickoffs, you're trying to kick touchbacks, which are 75 yards. But there are certain changes that you're making when you're kicking off versus when you're kicking field goals. You're essentially using the same mechanics to kick the ball, but at a higher rate of speed. And so, of course, there's adjustments that you make. Your angle's slightly different. Your plant foot's slightly narrower, but you're kicking off a tee, so that allows you to accommodate for that too. So there's definitely ways in which like you can use the Proform system as an all-round answer for all of your kicking challenges. And this doesn't just address goal kicking; it addresses out-of-hand kicking, drop kicks. Every type of kicking discipline can be addressed or can be governed by the Proform blueprint.
And is that why you'll see when goal kickers, or you get the odd 60-meter kicks where they'll step up and they'll connect it really well, but there'll be a pull miss, a right footer missing to the left because of that early rotation and not making provision for the amount of force that's going to be used to get the ball there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's again, just simply understanding the consequences of your movements and what you're doing. I can't speak too much on what these guys are doing because they've already got a lateral turn before they get to the ball. And there's consequences for that already, such as already running far inside the ball and then being off balance because the plant foot can't plant where it's running, and et cetera, et cetera. But for us, kicking longer distance kicks is simply understanding that you're further away from the ball, you're swinging faster, there's a little bit of a quicker rotation that will happen, but you can accommodate for that. The reason why most guys are missing, I've also noticed that especially high school kickers and even some of the pros, they change the way they kick the ball based on where they are on the field, based on the angle, based on the distance. So sometimes when they're closer, they kick it like a chip shot or whatever. They kick the ball softer. On the left-hand touchline, they have a certain angle. On the right-hand touchline, they change that. It's all crazy. Like I would never recommend that. But it's all just, again, just a symptom of just an old way of thinking. There's a better way to address those things. For us, we would just want to kick the ball exactly the same way every single time. And if you find that capacity, let's say, I always recommend like a 70 to 80% swing, which sounds like a lot of, it's a lot of effort. It's not really, especially if your body's moving efficiently and you're in the right position and so forth. That's where you really can control your swing. And you're not dialing it back or trying to kick the ball softer or anything like that. But you want to, and then you'll find your limit with that, with 4 steps, or the steps that we do: jab step, touch step, plant kick. You'll find your limit. Mine for that is like 56, 57 meters with just a jab step and a touch step and a plant and a kick. If I want to kick the ball further, I have to do something different. I need a little more speed, a little more momentum. And then again, I can just calibrate based on the consequences of having more speed and more momentum and more steps. So it just, again, comes down. It's so nice to have a system, and you know the system, you understand how it works, and you can change things here and there and understand the consequences of that.
Okay, so we get to the ball and we're looking at the contact now. Take us through what's the optimal foot shape and where on the ball do we want to kick it?
Yeah, so with Proform, and again, I can't speak too much on other people's techniques, but I know in the American football industry, there's a lot of things that's being coached that's so unnecessary, and it again comes down to a lateral mentality and the natural foot position that you'll present to the ball if you're turning your hips versus what we're doing when you're swinging forward, just like you're kicking a ball out of hand, like you're trying to kick a torpedo. The foot is just in a naturally flexed position. You don't have to do anything with the foot, other than maybe consciously just trying to keep your toes down and not lifting your toes up. But other than that, the foot and ankle is already in a naturally flexed position, and you're making contact with the ball with the perfect foot shape without having to do anything. In comparison, somebody that swings laterally, a lot of American football coaches that teach a lateral swing talk about locking the ankle and locking the leg. Don't even know what that means, but they teach that. But again, a consequence of the foot position that's produced by that lateral swing. You've got sort of more like a wedge shape or a club shaped foot. And then when you're in this natural flex position, your plant foot's in the correct place and your body position is correct, you're making contact with the ball. Majority of that impact is on the inside panel of the ball, which is the panel that you can see. If you've lined up the ball so that the seam is facing the goalposts and you've lined up correctly, you are looking at, actually I've got a ball here. So if you were looking at this ball from the back, if you're a right-footed kicker, you're looking at this panel. So we call this the inside panel. I've actually got a boot as well. And so...
Well prepared.
Yeah, so... Yeah, this is my office, so this is what I'm doing most of the day. But,
Nice.
So this foot is striking the ball on this inside panel with your toes down. So the majority of contact, as you can see, is like those laces there, the bridge of the foot up here, is on the inside panel. But this ball obviously has some forgiveness. So the foot compresses into the ball. And as a consequence of that, you're hitting most of the ball with most of your foot, just below the halfway point of the ball. And this is really where the ball has the most resistance. Like this is where you want to hit it. Not quite in the middle, but just below the middle. So right there, that is where you want to hit the ball. That's going to give you the most resistance and feedback, and that's going to allow you to kick this ball as far as possible. So yeah, luckily I had those things right here.
Well, like I said, Wihan, if you look at your videos and just the sound the contact makes, there is something different there. There is something special there. You know, I look forward to seeing, you know, kickers that you are going to work with. I look forward to seeing your progress. And thanks for the chat. You've opened up my eyes to a couple of things, and I'm definitely incorporating a couple of those things into my own kicking and the boys here in Japan. Thanks for the chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and honored to talk to you. You know, I didn't want to say this at the start, but I watched you growing up. Of course, you've probably heard this before. But yeah, always been a fan, and such a great interview. And I look forward to talking some more and dissecting some film, and perhaps even helping you with some of the guys there in Japan if you need some consultation.
It's the Out the Box Rugby Podcast with André Pretorius and Envia Velman, only on Megaphone Rugby.